And the Holy Gospel is according to John, the 11th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, Jesus was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But others of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he's been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. It seems to me the instructions were crystal clear. After raising Lazarus from the dead, Jesus said, "Unbind him and let him go." There's no question Jesus did the hard part. After 4 days in the tomb, he raised Lazarus from the dead. And as we all know, not long after raising Lazarus, Jesus himself would be raised up on a cross to save us and the whole cosmos from sin, death, and the power of evil. Indeed, Jesus did the hard part. He died a horrible death on a cross. He was placed in a tomb, and after 3 days, he was resurrected to new life. I hope you'll agree with me, Jesus did the hard part. But if we take a closer look at the gospel for today, we'll see that Jesus instructed the sisters and friends of Lazarus to do their part as well. After Jesus called Lazarus to come out, they were told to unbind him and let him go. Jesus did the hard part, but they had to do their part as well. They had to hold their breath long enough to avoid the stench of death, and then loosen the grave clothes that bound Lazarus and set him free. And just as they had to do their part until we breathe our last breath, we too must do our part. Only sometimes, like Lazarus, we need to be unbound and untethered and set loose from the realities and disappointments and complexity and distractions in our lives. Those very things that sometimes get in the way and keep us from receiving the gifts that God has given us and what God desires for us and from us. There are so many times when we are being called out, yet all too frequently, we continue to be bound by overwhelming feelings of uncertainty and anxiety. That's precisely, I think, when we need to be reminded of Christ's invitation to turn our very lives over to God and to make a conscious choice or decision to pray, not my will, but thy will be done on earth as in heaven. There are times we need to set aside our overinflated or even our fragile egos. Times when we need to relinquish our need for control. Times when we need to admit that we are not God. Times when we simply must trust in God's grace and God's mercy and forgiveness and love. Often, I think that these are the very things that get in the way of our engagement in the mission and ministry that God has entrusted to us. There are times when we miss opportunities to use our God-given gifts to bear witness to God's saving acts and to proclaim the good news through words and action. Perhaps there's even a reason why we aren't always in tune with God's will. Maybe it's because we allow ourselves to remain bound by feelings of inadequacy, bound by doubts that continue to haunt us, doubts that we have anything worthwhile to offer, bound by fears that we're too young or too old or too little or too whatever. Yet on this All Saints Sunday, we have gathered together to give God thanks and praise for those from the past who are now counted among the saints, even as we celebrate all of the saints in the present, who are Christ's body, the church, here and now. And as we look forward to the future and to the saints who will come after us. Today we are being invited to reaffirm the covenant God made with us in baptism, where we were buried with Christ into his death and raised up with Christ into his resurrection, where we were washed in the cleansing waters and raised to new life, eternal life, a life that has already begun and will continue throughout eternity. And so as we conclude our fall stewardship emphasis, a bridge from the past, in the present, and to the future, it's my privilege and my joy to personally say to you, thank you. Thank you. More poignantly, I invite you to join with me in giving thanks and praise to God for the spirit of generosity among us. To give thanks to God for the dearly departed saints of Central's 120 years of ministry, and for all of us who make up this small part of Christ's body, who are the church today. Because I thank God for each and every one of you. Each and every one of you. And I know that together we give as we are able. And you have given so freely of your time and your talents and your treasures. Over and over again, we've asked you to dig deep and give what you are able to support the ministry to which we are collectively called. And so today I want to invite you to join with me in trusting in the promise that God will provide all that we need, all the resources that will be provided through God's gifts of generosity given to us and through our own gifts of giving back. And through this generosity, I trust, and I want you to trust, that God will provide the sufficient resources in order to accomplish God's will. This is our mission, our calling. It is God's work. But it is our hands and our feet and our voices and our minds and our hearts, our whole lives, which God will use as God sees fit. And yes, there is always much work to do. So very many ways to share of ourselves, our time, and our possessions, signs of God's gracious gifts given freely to us. So let me joyfully give thanks to God for the music ministry at Central, for Elray and Lindsay, for our cantors and musicians, for the handbell and brass ensembles, for the chorale and children's choirs, for Music Together and its teachers and families, and for the community gathered together who offer here their voices in songs of praise to God. Let us give thanks to the saints of this congregation who serve so faithfully on various committees, none of which are glamorous, but we want to give thanks for the church council leaders and those who serve on personnel, property, finance, endowment, foundation, and for all of the various ministry teams that we have as well. Let us give thanks to God for the opportunities we have to share the gospel through social media and by streaming our worship services to reach those who are not able to be with us in person or those who are from a distance worshiping with us. And let us give thanks for all the saints who serve as worship leaders, greeters, ushers, crucifers, torchbearers, acolytes, lectors, communion servers, assisting ministers, and for all those saints who do the behind-the-scenes work, who live stream the services for us, and for those who prepare the worship space for worship and who prepare the elements for Holy Communion. Let us give thanks for all the saints who give their time and talents to serve those in need, for our quilters and our solace team, for Eucharistic ministers and for prayer ministers, for the saints who prepare meals for First Place families or make sandwiches for unhoused neighbors, for those who volunteer with friends in service to humanity, Food for Lane County, the Eugene Mission, and the Refugee and Immigration Services, and so many other ways that we collectively, individually, are serving the larger community. Let us give thanks for the members and friends of our congregation who give of their time and talents to nurture faithful living as leaders and as participants in the various Bible studies and education opportunities we offer, and for those who participate in Together Tuesdays, and for all who provide hospitality. And let us give thanks for all those who nurture our children, youth, and families, and for the partnership between the saints of Central, United, and Emmaus. Let us give thanks for the outreach ministry to university students through campus ministry, for Christus House residents, and for students who are served a meal and are fed at Hearth and Table and Thursday night Vespers. Let us give thanks for the opportunities to love one another and God. Let us rejoice and celebrate all of the ways in which God is leading and guiding us to engage and participate in the mission and ministry to which God is calling us. God has called us to this ministry from the past, in the present, and to the future. And for this we can give thanks to God. And so in closing, on this All Saints Sunday, as we affirm our intention to continue in the covenant God made with us in holy baptism, I want to invite you to imagine Jesus crying out to all of us. Imagine Jesus crying out with a loud voice saying, "Beloved saints of God, come out. Lay aside your grave clothes and live more fully and faithfully into this new and resurrected life you have received from me." Imagine Jesus whispering in your ear, "Come out. Come out. Lay aside the grave clothes that cling to you. and live more fully and faithfully into this new and resurrected life that I have given you. And now, O saints of God, may we rise up and give thanks and praise to God for all that we are and all that we will be. Thanks be to God.